That is unmuted for now. Good evening.
Some of us went to town hall,
I kind of figured that was going to start to happen.
including one of your committee members. Should be walking in.
We just started, yeah. Just gonna give it another minute or two for those. Yeah.
We have anyone on Zoom?
We do not, actually. That's okay. I haven't heard from Tom, so, but regardless, I think we're
All right, yeah, I think we'll call this meeting of CPDC to order. First item on the agenda is a signed permit application for 431 Main Street, Chase Bank.
So I'll share them on screen, but if you don't,
Okay.
maybe mind summarizing the proposal?
For the record, my name is Heather Dutko, and I work with Philadelphia Sign Company.
And the proposal is to install two wall signs. They're identical, 37 square foot each,
37 square foot.
one on the front elevation and one on the Washington Street elevation, and they're halo backlight.
Backlit.
And that's what.
Simple as that.
Signs during site plan review were shown, but they weren't formally approved, so that's why we need to just formalize the approval from this board.
Yep, so all area requirements
So all area
were met.
requirements were met.
They are allowed two wall
They
signs
are
on
allowed
different
two wall signs
facades.
on different
The halos
facades.
allowed,
The
so
halos allowed,
it all
so
worked out. I
it
know
all
there
worked
wasn't
out.
a draft
I know there
COA
wasn't
in this
a draft
case,
COA in this case,
but all is
but
shaped up
all
well.
is shaped up well.
So,
Is there no other sighting?
there was no other sign
included in the
site plan approval?
Correct.
Correct.
I think Chase has discussed the idea of a freestanding sign and special permits in this, but they want to move forward with by right signage in this case in the short term, but no other signage was improved. There's no drive-through signage or anything at this site.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, just for the record, as I did on the site plan review, I just want to let everyone know that the Vice President for Real Estate for Chase Bank is a close personal friend of mine, but I have no financial interest in him whatsoever.
Thank you. Comments from anyone, questions from anyone? Questions on
I have a question. What's the material of the
They're
letters?
aluminum returns.
They're aluminum
acrylic
returns
bases.
with acrylic bases.
So, are they completely opaque so that if they're haloed, is there going to be, there's a sign that ended up this way in town? Will there be light that ends up kind of seeping through the letters themselves, even though they're backlit?
So it should fully be just like a halo effect on the
Just like a
back.
halo effect on the back.
You can just see if they note that on the drawings. Because sometimes there is like a clear backing
Clear backing.
on the letters that I think would
Letters
do
that
that
I think would do
in some
that.
case. Well, of course I can't find them. Installation. I don't see it detailed on here, but that's not the intent. That's not in like shine through the letters. It looks so the letters look so.
You can add that as a condition. It is the definition.
What I'm thinking about is just, even though that's the intent, is that if the letters themselves are of any material because they're white, if they're,
Yep.
some sort of assurance that
It doesn't bleed through the front of the letter.
exactly, that they're totally solid and block the light.
How are the lights controlled?
So Andrew had a question about
So
that.
Andrew had a question about that. That's,
They're for brightness or for time?
for brightness or for time.
They're intended to be on
Intended to be on.
24/7 because they have a
24/7 or 24/7
ATM in the vestibule.
ATM in the vestibule.
And we did have a short discussion about this. That there's no, you're happy to abide by any
You have to
restriction if
abide
there
by
is a
any
restriction.
restriction, if there is a
However, we don't think that there is
restriction. We
an
don't think that
overall
there is
restriction
overall
in the bylaw.
There is not in the bylaw for business B.
So there is, if there's some concern about them being on 24/7, Chase is willing to
Chase is willing to
abide by if you have a restriction,
abide by if
if
you
you
have a
want them off
restriction,
by,
if you want them off
you know, a
by
certain time, 12 or
certain time,
whatever, 11 or 12. They're happy to do that.
they're happy to
But
do
there
that.
is lighting, there will be 24/7 lighting for the vestibule.
For the vestibule.
Because that is accessed
Because that is accessed.
24 hours a day, so there is lighting on site for that.
Lighting on site for that.
That vestibule is on the south facade, I believe, correct? To the main entrance to the site. Sorry.
So that's up for discussion. I mean, they're not unwilling to work with that if you feel that this should be some.
If we could get the north side closed at midnight or 11 o'clock, I think that would be useful, considering there's definitely a residential across the street, and there may be more residential coming.
Yeah.
Is that the Washington Street?
That would be
Yeah.
Washington
Yeah.
Street.
Okay.
The other side that faces essentially sort of McDonald's.
So McDonald's can stay on. But I'm thinking about people on
Yeah.
Washington Street.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
And our standard has usually been
We usually say 11
like
or an hour.
an hour after closing
Yeah,
or
11, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm happy
But
to
you're not going to, right.
condition
there's no
that. Right.
Baker's hours, so 11, yeah.
Okay, that's fine. That makes
Okay.
sense.
And I do see, looking through the detail, close up, it does look like this says that these are going to be aluminum letter, like aluminum all the way around, like extruded letters with painted.
Oh, okay.
That's what it says on here. Fabricated aluminum paint face to match.
Okay, because usually they're acrylic, but we changed the material for this one.
Yeah, fabricated aluminum octagon segment.
Okay.
So like the logo,
So if they're
right, it'll be in a full
absolutely
aluminum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, so that's better than.
That's
That's that, right, there's no question.
Yeah.
Yes,
Thank you for seeing that.
yeah. It's in there, but the small print, so,
I can't zoom them.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, there it is.
Other questions or comments? No? All right, so, right, we don't have a certificate of appropriateness drafted, but.
But it'll be done.
Yeah, so, right, with the one, really the one condition, aside from the typical that you include.
Yep. Yeah, so there will be standard conditions, building and electrical permits, fee and building permit process associated. We would condition at minimum north side facade to shut off at 11 p.m. and all letters to be opaque, despite the detail. I'll put that in there.
Anyone, other comments based on that?
No, I was going to make a motion.
You're welcome to do that.
Motion to accept the certificate of appropriateness for Chase Bank signs, north face, south face, signs being aluminum letters, opaque, with halo lighting, the north side to shut off at 11 o'clock.
It's very thorough, I'll second that.
Try and be thorough.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Right. 4, yeah, 4-0.
All right,
All right,
thank you very much.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
follow up. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Andrew.
All right. Next item, we have a continued public hearing for definitive subdivision application at 0 Harold Ave. The applicant requested, right, that
Yep,
they request
they
to
did, yep.
continue to Monday, June 10th.
Yep. So just of note, when we had originally discussed this, a lot came up in terms of the access rights. And what we'll be working towards in the short term is making sure they have compliant proof and waiver discussion, and we'll chat access after that, but they want to get the design right, and council and staff have felt that that's an appropriate step to take before access, and so at hearings, we'll kind of move along slowly on this path, but just wanted to give some context to the continued continuances here. They need a valid proof plan.
Okay.
So, Andrew, let us suppose that where we finalize the design and they haven't had the final decision on access. Do you envision us approving that design, approving it conditionally, or basically holding off until the access is resolved?
I do not. Our recommendation would be to hold off until the access is resolved, but you would have the ability, if you found fitting, to condition as necessary. But my recommendation would be to hold off until it's all solved.
And would that impact us by any time constraints?
It does not, as long as we get full agreements on continuances.
Okay. Then motion to continue 0 Harold Ave subdivision to Monday, June 10th.
I'll second.
All those in favor? All right, 4-0 again.
All right, nice. Thank you.
All right, next up, discussion on MBTA communities.
Great, thank you. I think this will be one of our quicker MBTA communities discussions, but.
Wow. What happened here? I gathered all the people who were at town hall.
Thank you. I just wanted to take this step because we're really starting to gear up again in terms of the engagement process and where we're headed. So we had just finished town meeting this last week or so ago now. There was a brief MBTA communities update there, just again in terms of raising awareness. We didn't get too into specifics, but more just on process, what it is, where we're at. That went very well. There was a different article for funding request at town meeting to support consultant services and engagement services on the staff side and or with the consultant. I had been requesting $75,000 to help, really what was to start resupplement the pattern book for whatever concept we moved forward with, because that in scope with the grant had fallen short given the change to timeline and needs for modeling and engagement. So it just got reduced in the scope. I was asking the funds to resupport that because it felt like a strong tool that we heard through the process would be nice. What we heard through town meeting actually was they upped the funding to $150,000. And I guess most of the conversation revolved around the study of impacts, if we can, sewer, traffic, or schools. And admittedly, you know, those are things we've always worked to answer. In terms of a study, they are a bit limited in fashion, just in terms of, let's go with sewer, for example. One, we would look to start finalizing any given concept and area for that study. And then two, it really becomes the question of how that study is shown, right? So you could model towards capacity, and you could do that at a full build-out scenario, a 50%, a 33%. But given any contextualized area, it's hard to know at that 50%, right? Let's just use the mixed residential, given that that's a concept that we were previously discussing. Even at a 50% study, it's hard to identify exactly which areas, which streets would be more impacted than one another. So sewer is just a very hard one to study without a specific project in mind. Typically, you would see them for a larger, more intense project at like a reuse industrial area, but you know the size of the project and the uses to expect. School children, I can say the same. You know, there are some baselines in terms of, you know, you could apply 0.4 students to every unit that you might project or expect, but again, how does that work out over time and the redevelopment rate that we kind of shared throughout the process? Traffic is similar in that nature. And with the context that if it was a large enough project during site plan review would require its own traffic study. So when we talk about those specific studies, you know, that was the intent of, I think, what town meeting was getting at. So I do want to support them in that ask, and I will find methods to do that. But there is analysis that I've seen out there for some communities who have been working towards this on economic analysis in terms of potential new growth rates, or more what new growth means in terms of increased value to the community to help support some of those impacts. And that's maybe where I'm thinking that this study could go. We are working to get a scope from Weston and Sampson on sewer modeling. We are working to get a scope on this type of economic analysis and the cost related to that. But that's kind of where that is at now. So I wouldn't, again, we should get through the process in terms of finalizing the concept and design, hopefully. But that's where my preliminary thoughts are on that increased funding. I didn't necessarily have a wish list going into town meetings, so I'm just trying to strategize the best use of it to get at what people are asking for. And I do want to respond to that, but I just know that some of the impact studies are a bit limited or in capacity in what they can adequately explain for the short term. So I just wanted to put that out there. And if you guys have thoughts, happy to.
Well, so you have $150,000. I assume that that's not available till July 1.
Mm-hmm.
So that gives you, and we're going to town meeting, fall town meeting. So you basically have about 3 months to have a consultant
Right.
get something done, which being a consultant, it's
Right.
probably not going to happen. Especially where we don't really know what we're looking at yet. I mean, like you said, there's pieces you can look at. You can look at sewer capacity with a model and a bunch of stuff. But it seems like, what we really ought to be focusing on is what is the best plan or plans, and how do we communicate that to the public, as opposed to addressing every specific thing like, well, what's going to happen to the traffic on Summer Ave? Because we don't know what's going to be built or where it's going to be built. But we do know it could be built on Summer Ave, or it could be built on Prescott Street, or it could be built on...
I guess what I heard, right, I was watching it on RCD, or maybe wherever, was it YouTube maybe? And what I thought I heard, and I know Heather, you were there, maybe you heard something different, that there were sort of during that discussion, there were two conversations going on. One was a discussion about, from some people, about impacts, like you said, but the other about wanting more, to make sure that you had the resources to fully explore the different concepts. So, right, in the discussions we had before, where, the industrial, using the industrial zone or downtown, and the fact that it's you're you, right? You're it. That does take a lot of work, just to build, just to
scope it out.
Scope it out and use the tool that is difficult, and do all that. Right, it's a level of effort, and you can't do it all. You're down staff, and that's what I thought that I heard equally as that support as it was. Let's figure out the impacts. I will say, right, some of those, because like traffic. Let's look out here, right? If development, right, this neighborhood out the window here. If development in this area triples, will triple the traffic. I saw one car go by. There's one car, right?
Yep.
That's not the issue, I think, right? When people talk about traffic, we're talking really about parking, right? It's not traffic. And so I think that when some of these things, right, it's not necessarily what was stated, but it's what's the threshold of, right, for sewer. I'm not a sewer guy. I don't really, but like when do we get to that threshold that we need to invest in something more? And would a build out of what we have now, right, of our existing zoning, right, because there is a build out of that, plus the build out of the new zoning, like where is that threshold line? Or, right, I think there's a couple of different things that could be looked at.
So I was there, I heard a few things, and yes, the person the town meeting member who first suggested that, hey, I would give Andrew more money, was talking about impacts. And then the amendment wasn't necessarily tied to go study the impacts. I also heard both of those. There was another thing that I heard come up is a feasibility study for increasing the affordability requirements. That was something very specific that was brought up. And my takeaway, I did not come away with the takeaway that our marching orders were to take the additional $75,000 and go study the impacts. And I actually have some concerns about that, because I actually don't know what studying the impacts will get us in terms of the choices that we have before us. I don't think the choice we Cpdc has before us is whether or not we do this. And things like how many school children will it bring? Will we need to replace the sewers? Will we have parking impacts? I don't know exactly how one would go about studying that in 3 months when we don't even have the scenarios in front of us, but I did hear some concern for getting those scenarios done according to what was presented at the last hearing, and doing it well and having the right amount of public outreach and public involvement so that there could be robust community discussion. And I did hear some interest in doing the feasibility study around affordability.
Yeah.
That's what it's called.
So that, I guess, what kind of ended up getting missed is like the affordability analysis is in the grant work and scope already. Okay. And again, comes down to the specific area on how we model it. Is it 10%, 15%, 20%? What's the density to get to those numbers? But no, I agree. There was more than impacts. That's where I started on the focus, just to start the conversation. But it is a lot of it's based on trends in the built environment until you start seeing them.
And can you remind me, I thought when I was somewhere in there when I was digging into some of the guidance around MBTA communities, so maybe not at the start, but maybe over the winter, I thought I read something from like guidance from the Attorney General's office or whatever the source was, saying this isn't about sewer and school impacts. These things actually may not be considered in your analysis. But I ask, that's truly a question of, am I mistaken in remembering that? And even if that's the case, I know that's not going to fall on happy ears in the town, but my understanding is that this is kind of, yes, there will be impacts. There are mass work grants that are available for that. Sewer upgrades do need to be made kind of all the time, and that shouldn't be a reason to not do this, because it's the law and we have to do it.
Yeah, the only loan requirement, well, I shouldn't say loan requirement, in terms of children, is that the zoning must allow for family households, so we can't restrict that. There is no requirement to study sewer or even build sewer. But you're right, yep, that we do a lot of work, a lot of preemptive work in town too, and Trina and I work sewer upgrades, infrastructure work. We are pretty proactive on that. The engineering department does a great job. But if again, it comes down to trends in neighborhoods, and if we started to see the built environment increasing, then you take a second look, right, your capital planning process. So,
of course, I do think the community will want to know what the impacts will be.
Yeah.
That all said.
Yeah.
Can we ask questions? Or
yeah.
do we need to wait until you guys are finished with your discussion?
I guess, I want to know where he's going, like where the discussion is going before
Yeah. So I'm happy to move to the next step. I thank you guys for that feedback. The next step would be schedule and where we're headed with this. And sorry.
Okay, so if that's right, where we're headed, right, sort of right, the next topic is where we're headed, the discussion, the logistics, but based on sort of what we've been talking about, yeah, absolutely, if you have questions or comments.
So I just wanted to, I think, sorry.
Name and address, please.
Sure. My name is Chris DiMattei. This is my wife Colleen, in case she speaks. We both live at 172 High Street in Reading, just down the road. So I think Heather's point is correct in that, in the eyes of the state, they don't want towns to use, impacts to the schools, impacts to the sewers, impacts to the roads as justification for not doing this, right? So with that being said, I think you have to keep going back to reading the letter of the law, right? So the law states that we have to come up with a zone or multiple zones, and we have to do it by the end of the year, right? So if you're, from where I sit, if you're going to spend that $75,000 or $150,000, I think it's in the town's best interest to spend that money to get you to the point where you're meeting the law or satisfying the town's requirement to meet the letter of the law, right? So, you know, maybe you earmark, if you do that and you only spend 80,000 out of the 150, then maybe you can earmark the remainder to do some of those impact studies after the fact. But ahead of November, you kind of have to stay focused on what we need to do for the end of the year, right? And you only have one shot at this. It's November, right? We just saw that in Wakefield, they just voted down all 3 articles for zoning changes, and I'm assuming they have a second go-around later in the year.
Yep.
But we don't have that option, so we have to come up with something that's right, that we can pitch to the town meeting members and hopefully get a consensus in November, or we're in trouble because we're out of compliance. So that's kind of where I think, and I think you probably agree, that you just need to stay focused on that, whatever that is, right? But the one other comment that I wanted to make about the law being as of right is, like, I was sitting here thinking, you know, sure, if we do this and developers want to come in and build buildings and that has an impact on the sewers and the whatever, you know, we can make those conditions of the development that they increase capacity of the sewers or fix parking or whatever. But I don't know if you can do that if the zoning says, hey, this is as of right, the only thing you have to do is meet building codes, and everything else is, yeah, we want that, but we don't have to do it. We're not mandated to do that. So I think that's a bit of a slippery slope to think that we might be, if we approve this zone and it ends up being an as-of-right zone, we aren't going to be able to impose conditions after the fact for things like infrastructure improvements that may be necessary for those properties to get built. They're not going to do that, you know, or at least I'm in fear of them not doing that, because the zoning states they don't have to, right? So that's what I wanted to say about that.
No, appreciate that. Yep.
Can you correct me if I'm wrong, but could we require site plan review for multifamily housing, even if it is by right?
Yes, so site plan review will be triggered for them, and you can condition certain elements within a degree, but development impact fees are kind of an upcoming conversation, at least in Massachusetts. We won't go too far down the road there tonight, but even if they are allowed in certain cases, they do have to be tied to the certain impact of that specific proposal or anticipated impact. So if you're talking a 3-unit structure, how you tie that to traffic, sewer, things like that, what is that amount? But that's a whole different conversation.
But I do think that that's, as you know, as far as the feasibility studies are concerned, people who haven't attended these meetings, they really, I think the regular person on the street, that's the first thing they think about are, you know, what's going to happen with the sewers and you know, the water and traffic. It's number one in their minds. And I think that it's unfortunate because, like Chris said and you guys all said, the timeline isn't right anymore for that. And but I do think it's important to most people. And I think people think in order to make an informed decision about this, they want to know, like, okay, so if we have to do stuff with the sewer and it's not tied into the new changes in the zoning, and we have to front that money as, you know, people who live in this town, that's, you know, is that how, you know, they want to make an informed decision about that. And I can see it, you know, I get it. But it's unfortunate because I think we're in a bad situation right now.
To Tony's point about the site plan review, how much authority, I'm not really familiar with how that process goes, but how much authority is tied to that mean, do you have the ability to say, within the site plan review, hey, we think there's a streetlight that needs to be added because this is now creating a big intersection, and can you force a developer to have to pay for that as part of the site plan review, or is that beyond the authority of the site plan review? I'm wondering if we're relying too heavily on the site plan review to maybe get some of those concessions that we feel might be necessary for infrastructure.
I think in the site plan review that we can do that, and I'll give, I'm an infrastructure engineer, so, and water's my expertise. So for instance, if someone is building a 4-unit structure and there's not adequate fire flow out in the street, it's not the town's responsibility to provide that. He has to do that. So it may mean that he has to go 2 streets over and replace a 4-inch water main with an 8-inch water main.
Okay.
And that can the town can't allow something to be built that isn't safe.
Right. Okay.
I think water and sewer wise though, Reading has a pretty good infrastructure system. So I think there'll be maybe a little bit here and a little bit there, but I think in overall, water and sewer isn't going to be a big issue. Stormwater, they're working on, but it's more traffic is probably the biggest issue.
For necessity items like fire safety and fire truck access and whatever, yes, but for things like convenience, having to sit at a stop sign 5 times.
If you've ever read a traffic study, I've never seen one that says this is going to create a total traffic disaster. They use these numbers that if, unless you're a traffic engineer, you don't understand what it's going from a level B to a level C+.
Right.
What does that mean? The queuing time is now going to be 1 minute more. Well, sitting there late for a minute's a long time.
Yeah.
So, in thinking back of all the site plan reviews that I've participated in, it's a couple of things. One is almost always, right, someone comes in and they're looking to do something that doesn't match the letter of the zoning, right? There's always some unique thing, or they're trying to push the envelope, right? And when they do that, that's where there's a little more give and take. Right, because in the end, we don't, site plan review, you don't have the ability to say no, but what you do have the ability to say no to that yes to that if you do this, right? So it's a little bit more of a negotiation. I can't even remember one where there wasn't some of that, unless it was like a plain vanilla, like they had to come in. Right. We used to require people to come in if they were doing, I forget what the thresholds were, but there was one particular case I remember. They were re-siding, it was a commercial business, and they were re-siding the house, it was a house on South Main Street, and they were re-siding, and because it was so many square feet of change that they had to come through site plan review. Like, what are we doing? Like, why, like, they had, right, like, wait, we got to change our rules. Like, we don't care, right? But aside from some basic ones like that, there's usually some, like, oh, they want to do something that doesn't quite fit the rules, the zoning rules.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of back and forth. And for something like what we've been proposing, there will be a lot of that, right? Because all of these, like everything, we don't have nice square rectangular little parcels for the most part. I mean, there's a few, but there's, So.
And one of the other ways that you can handle infrastructure is, we talk about impact fees, you have connection fees. So when you connect to the water, the sewer, the stormwater system, you charge them a fee, and I don't know what those fees are in Reading, but you can make them progressively more depending on the impact. So so there is a way to recover some of the money. I mean, we've all been paying to connect to the MWRA system, and someone shouldn't be able to come in now and say, well, we're going to build something new, and thanks for paying for that for us.
Right.
So
and
that's sort of the idea behind the connection fees, but you can make them progressively to help with the impact on the system.
Right.
I think from my point of view, when we talk about having consultants doing something for us, reading the recalc, or I looked at their PowerPoint with 3 different options for the senior center site. And that's the kind of thing I would say would be beneficial, is to have, here's the alternatives we looked at, here's what meets the minimum requirements. Right. These are the advantages, disadvantages, potential impacts. And the impacts on a minimal are probably going to be more, because it's going to be much more dense construction. So you have more traffic, more water and sewer infrastructure impacts, as well as economic impacts of not being able to have a lot more commercial development things, and then have different options of plans and have a better choice of what's the advantages to this one versus the advantages this one versus advantages to this one. It's a lot of work to put that together. Yeah. And that's what I would see would be beneficial, as well as some visualizations.
Yes. Visuals are...
I get the feeling from one of our meetings that people thought that someone was going to build a 6-unit brick apartment building in a neighborhood full of split entries. And because that's when you talk about multi-unit, that's what a lot of people think. They don't think it's going to be, you drive down like, right on the bottom of Prescott Street, where they're rebuilding I think it's a 4 or 6.
I think that's a 3 to 4 unit.
Yeah, I mean, it fits in with that part of the neighborhood. So I think if you could visualize more of what this multifamily and how it would fit into neighborhoods.
Yeah, so since you brought it up, let's just quickly go over kind of where we're at for the short-term next steps.
Yeah, real quickly, one of the things that I would hope that we'd be able to do, right, is you mentioned what are the different alternatives, how do they impact, maybe not the idea of like the impacts that we're talking about, but like what does parking on, if there's going to be, visitor parking or whatever on some of these streets, right? What is that? What's that mean on, right, one alternative versus the other? Because, right, some streets, right, we all know some streets could handle more on-street parking and some just can't, right? And so I think those are the types of sort of, as you said, like, comparing two alternatives, like where are the real concerns that we'd have to struggle through. So right.
So just to kind of summarize some of that in terms of next steps and where we're going with those concepts. First, schedule. Obviously, with the intent to make November town meeting, it's still very quick moving. November town meeting is scheduled.
Could you make that a little bit bigger?
It's right up there, sorry. But town meeting is mid-November, already scheduled. The warrant closes in late September. That warrant date is important because we have to have our public hearings done before that warrant date. And by that warrant date. So trying to really work backwards from September 24th, and I'm taking a better look at this now, but we'll start from the bottom, work our way up now to September 24th, right? We're in April, May, June, preparing all the conceptual models, where we're going with them, what we're running, which we'll talk about briefly in just a short minute, but really the intent from there is to restart the kind of preliminary engagement process before the public hearings, that broader public engagement, where my ideal is 3 to 4 engagement series, again, similar to what we did in the fall. How each one is strategized is still what I'm working through in terms of, right, we're going to have a menu of options on the table to begin, and the idea is that we're again narrowing back down to one. All of the things we hashed through in the previous engagement process. I guess how we choose that one preferred alternative concept is really the question, and how we engage on that to get the right answer, because there's so many different possible answers. So that's something I'm still working through. admittedly, I'm not proposing another survey at this time, right? Vote for your favorite alternative and those type of things. So I think it's really going to be strongly conversation-based in what we hear in terms of, again, forms and those potential impacts of reality into the existing neighborhoods or areas. So ideally,
When you say forms, basically you're referring to the envelope of the building.
Yes. Yes, correct.
So it's not a case of we're setting something up to say you have to do it this way. We're saying basically, here are your limitations.
Right.
You can put something within that envelope for that building on this lot here, and we don't really care what you're putting there so long as you meet the requirements.
Or are you talking about the style of the building?
More Tony's point.
Yeah.
So there will be the controls that guide the development, and that's what, I guess, promotes the form or architectural style, and not everything is perfect or apples to apples. I can't require a gabled roof, for example, but if your height is 30 to 35 feet, you know that's promoting more of the residential style versus a 4 to 5 story building that would just be shaped differently in its nature. So those are the controls, and each area has different controls that it may warrant based on the existing context of those areas and the allowances that they could maintain, so, which we'll get to. But ideally, between June to late July, there's a series of engagements to start narrowing down that preferred concept, and then we run straight into public hearings in late summer, early September. This one's highlighted only because it's your pre-existing CPDC date that I'd love to make use of if our agendas allow for it, but time will tell. So these are the dates I'm tentatively moving forward with. I'm going to lock them down this week and do a save the date notice to the town. But those are what I'll be working with, basically strategizing from here to then. So just kind of briefly running through thoughts on at least early engagement. You know, the first engagement is intended to set the stage again. Here's the areas of interest. Here's the models on each and their unit capacities, densities, the visual forms that zoning would actually look to allow for in whatever different kind of site specifics would come up. But it's more these latter 2 or 3 that, again, we have to figure out how we narrow those options based on what we hear. And so, you know, just think about that as we move forward. But it's going to be pretty fast moving and hard hitting at the end of the day. I said that at town meeting. We have only this summer to get through it and close before November. So, and then between September and November, you know, we can continue studying, evaluating, working through some finer details, but the public hearing, again, is more intended to get into the specifics of bylaw text and how that works in existing policy structure. So the preliminary engagement is more just trying to gain consensus and confidence in whatever moves forward. So where we're at now is I'm running.
Andrew, I have a question. So you can't engage a consultant until July 1?
So I have a consultant because we have grant funds right now.
Okay,
but
all right. So because some of this was like, wait,
Yeah.
we have all the answers.
the
by
town meeting
July.
funds take a few weeks to actually get approval and access to, which admittedly in the short term, I'm trying to figure out the town-wide mailings. I want to do one before the summer engagement to do the save the dates, and then here's the public hearings actual proposal if you would like to come town-wide. They're like $10,000 a piece, so I'm trying to figure out how, because I would like to do that obviously before June, and if that funding isn't available just yet, how can I kind of work that? So figuring that out, but I will figure that out. So really where we're at is starting that work with the engagement with the consultant through the grant, and we want to run through and model a number of different scenarios that we heard but either tonight or at that first engagement, ideally we start scratching things off, because it's just a lot of sub-concepts that you can go down the rabbit hole in, and admittedly, I would love to avoid the idea of 8 concepts being proposed. So right now where we're at, there's 4 primary concepts, we'll call it. I think we all, at least in this room, are somewhat familiar with where we ended. So I'm just going to remodel quickly. I already have them, but I want to put them all in a book in one PDF with the consultant. The mixed residential that we worked through in the last set of public hearings. I'm going to model what was V2, which was the latest map, and then what was the bare minimum map in terms of unit capacity, getting as close to the unit capacity as possible. I do want to remodel it too, because late in the public hearings, we came up through public comment with the idea that, okay, well, anything that's over 15,000 square feet, maybe we can push the controls back down to actually closer to how they exist today. So just making sure that works in the model is helpful. But regardless, that's a fairly straightforward one, just given that we all know what it is and where it's at. One highlight there is only that we were looking at a 10% inclusionary requirement for 10 plus units. That would have rounded down because of the subject to further analysis. We could run that analysis now. I'll ask the consultant about it, but again, I think that analysis is saved for what would be the preferred 1 or 2 concepts, rather than trying to do it for every single concept, just because they are a little difficult in nature. The other concept was potentially mixed residential in the core and outside of the half-mile core that came up. Admittedly, this is certainly, I'll admit, not my top recommendation by any means. Looking at other pockets of town, what we would call radiuses or pockets, they became they were just starting to substantially increase acreage or overlapping with the existing mixed residential zone from A1, concept A above. So it wasn't really working on paper, and the density allowance is promoting bigger builds rather than smaller builds like around the town center. Wasn't really working out, but I still wanted to put something on paper, just given what we've heard. So what we came up with was corridor potential modeling, and I'll bring up the map in a second. But we're looking at North Main Street actually and Salem Street just as the first corridors to start looking at in terms of what a model would spit out in terms of density and unit capacity, in the light that maybe potentially this is an idea that we could look to revision North Main Street or transportation choice along Main Street, Salem Street, Woburn Street, some of those more primary arteries that connect directly to downtown. So in terms of mixed residential outside of the town center, this was the strongest concept I could find, and we'll be looking to model if all agree tonight. Again, I'll show the map in a second before jumping, but basically ran the analysis of all the existing parcels up and down Main Street and Salem Street, came to the conclusion that a majority actually, they are slightly larger than the mixed residential we were looking at, so a 10,000 square foot minimum feels viable. A bit larger of setbacks just to model, so we can try to set a floor, and how those change, we could figure out then. But the intent of these 2 zones or corridors would simply be to just take the bare minimum that's needed for the 15 units per acre of a zone, and not unit capacity, right? Whatever the unit capacity is, we'll add that too, but these corridors are not intended to capture the full need of the law. They're more just how they could play with a zone within the half-mile, but I need to understand how they work by themselves before I can partner them with something else. So I will model that, and let me just show the maps real quick just so there's some context to them. If I have them somewhere. Let's see if this works. This should work. So, yep, perfect. So this was the North Main Street corridor. We broke them up into 3 separate shape files to model with the intent that, well, maybe if this is somewhat appropriate or desirable by anyone in the community, maybe you just look at R3 or maybe R2 and R3, or do you combine them all? We could kind of mix and match from there. This one is obviously subject to some larger lots, the home goods and things like that, which can play a role, but Salem Street similarly, there were some pockets down here that had a variety of forms. Admittedly, I would recommend not rezoning R4 or R6, but for many reasons, but happy to model them. But in terms of this, it was more intended to just set some floors of what could be possible outside of the town center, which isn't shown on this map. But
I'm sorry, R4, is that, what's it, the street that has like all the A, B, C, D? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought it was more a different angle, but.
Yeah, they're smaller, older stock.
Yeah.
They're good stock of housing to try to maintain. So it's why I wouldn't recommend rezoning it. But you know.
So right, I just want to reiterate something that you said. Right, the idea here, or the requirement actually, to be compliant would be not these standalone,
right?
But these as a way to disperse the housing and the impacts, and therefore be able to change the zoning that's been envisioned in the core, in downtown.
Exactly. If we could shrink that acreage, if we keep going with the mixed residential with this, or if we use downtown and these directly abut, there's some combinations there that you can try to play with. But I just wanted to get something out there for mixed residential outside the half mile, and this felt the most fitting. And could you do Woburn Street too? Yes, but I modeled a lot of that. So that's where that concept is at and working towards. The other concept, and this is where it gets into a lot of sub-concepts where you could, is utilizing commercial zones to reach full compliance and not touching any single family or A40 even existing zoning. So there's a few concepts that I'm looking to model, and this memo isn't fully finished, but the intent is it will be done tomorrow. But for fully commercial areas, there's a few options we could look for, and option 1 would be simply utilizing downtown only, meet the minimum density and unit capacity. That would be the goal in downtown only. I think it's going to model far too high and by right density to be a real option, but I just want it on paper here. I need to do it. So
be like converting R40R district only?
Yes, sorry, using 40R and amending it almost to what was pre-2021 language, or pretty close. I could probably, I'll play with the model a bit to try to get to a bit of landscape requirements that we heard in that process, and maybe some stronger setbacks. But I'm going to start at a model that's more closely to what was 2019 bylaw, let's call it, but with the note that density just has to go up for by right. Yeah. So we're going to model downtown only, 1.
Right. I'll say, whether that moves past this phase or not, I think it's really important to get that modeling done, because we heard that so many times.
I agree. Some people were saying, why didn't you use downtown? And of course, we were the ones who were saying, well, you kind of, town meeting blocked our ability to do that.
You can demonstrate to the community, hey, we did this.
Right.
and it didn't work.
Right.
Or it does work.
It does work,
Right.
but it looks horrible,
Yeah.
or it creates too much density, or whatever.
Yeah.
Or it can work, and, for instance, this is all hypothetical, if the model shows it can work in the 2019 bylaw that was essentially rejected, can make it work. I've also heard inklings of people are like, well, if it might seem better by comparison.
Right,
Yeah.
right, to that, yep.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and that's, right, if the model spits out, you need 55 units per acre to do that on the lots.
Yeah.
Well, let's give that context, right? Like, that is close to what exists today, but the difference is we used waiver processes to negotiate with the developments to get things out of them. So, right, so a little context there, but the other idea would be for fully commercial districts, 3 more concepts that I'll model is trying to partner, I call it business B, but 40R and business A, because they do touch, at least in the northern half of South Main Street, getting mapping here, but they touch, so you might be able to play with the densities, and this also may support area outside the half mile ask, because business A goes all the way down South Main Street. Could we, right, maybe then your density is, instead of a full district at downtown district at 50 units an acre, let's call it, maybe you get 30 units per acre in both of these, but it's just a corridor and downtown. More area, but lesser density by right. I will look to model industrial district only, just to add, I guess, again, density and unit capacity, which is the big one. What is the actual density needed to get the unit capacity in the industrial district only? And in certain pockets, that one's going to be a little bit more difficult to model, only based on how I break it up, and I'll show the map again. But then the fourth option would be trying to figure out, is there a way we can use all 3 commercial districts? So, different level of impact there in terms of using all of your, not all, but a good chunk of your commercial area potentially for housing, but conversation willing to engage on and put out on paper again. So just to share out the new areas being modeled, if I can figure this out. In commercial districts, not that one, not that one, not that one. Here we go. So downtown, yes, it's not on this map. I already have the shape file and need to draw it. But splitting business A, split it into 2 different shape files again, in the light that maybe we only want to use half of it. Maybe we want to use the whole thing. But again, need to understand how each works in their floors and to get compliance in each shape before you start modeling it in partnership with other commercial zones. So the industrial area I broke into 4 different segments. This is the Staples Plaza. I don't think there's much interest or intent to rezone over that one, but I wanted to model it as well.
Is there, just to cut you off on that, I sort of assumed that there was some sort of deed restriction to prohibit residential on that. I mean, it's a capped landfill, right? There has to be what they call it, an AUL on it.
Right.
Right? I mean,
there is,
So if we can't build residential.
If you can't build residential on it, right? Like, let's not even do that.
Even consider that.
Yeah. But I would check on that, because I'm pretty sure that.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of the AUL.
That you can't build residential on that.
Okay. That would help. IND2 there is the Market Basket and Stop and Shop lots. IND3 is just south of that, some of the gas stations and other along Walkersbrook Drive. And IND4 is across the tracks and RMLD, DPW, things like that. I only separated that one because it's likely deserving of a bit lesser density if we can help it, given the Ash Street context and things we've heard there. So try to model that a little differently, but I think 2, 3, and 4 were the prominent discussions through the public hearing process. So I'm going to model them and then try to combine them in whatever fashion. But again, the intent is that through modeling all of these individually, I can start to combine them and play with density allowances for business B, business A, and IND together, separate, things like that, to bring forward hopefully a top recommendation. Right there you saw 4 sub-concepts. I'm hopeful myself to parse that down to maybe 2 in terms of the engagement in mid to early July, mid-June to early July, just because it will take a long time to run through all 4 of these plus everything else. But I'm happy to have that conversation at our June meeting if the agenda allows for it.
Andrew, could you shortcut that modeling? If you know the acreage and you know the number of units required, wouldn't that give you a rough estimate of your density per acre?
Yeah. So, well, it doesn't really, because it still comes down to the parcels and how they model out. And I mean, the good news about IND is there's not a lot of parcels, so it's quicker work to figure it out. But business A and business B are just a little different in their sizes and capacity. So it's just a unique, fast-moving, I guess, model right now. So,
but pretty much with all these business and industrial ones, we are looking at large-scale developments, 30 to 50 to beyond units per acre. So you're looking at more of Gould Street, Haven Street type developments.
Right. I modeled them myself a bit earlier, I think closer in the late end of the public hearing, and it looked like about 30 units was the floor, but I'm trying to play with some things that, can it be 3 stories instead of 4 like I modeled? And if I come down to 3 stories, do I have to increase the density even by 1 unit or something like that? So trying to get them all more to the level of 3 stories, some setbacks, good amount of setbacks, 1.25 to 1.5 parking. And I will share this with you for comment as well, and I'm happy to put it on the website, but they'll have the proposed controls of all of it. But there are things that I'm asking the consultant, in the mixed residential concept, there's no way, because they're going to have to toggle some things for me, but there's no way you can change height in the mixed residential concept. In a commercial concept, maybe you get a bit more play for height, but probably not above 45 feet, things like that. So there are some restrictions I'm placing on the model to try to fit it within Reading. But the other alternative is simply then taking those and with the intent that I'll model business B and the mixed residential together. So the way the law works uniquely is if 2 separate districts are congruent and touching, you can have different density allowances. So the mixed residential, so including even the 15 units per acre across the zone, but together they have to achieve it in a bit wonkier of a way, but that's for me to wear. Regardless, what it means is if we had the business B concept and said, this across the district is closer to 25 units per acre, and whatever that means on a lot, is different, but the district gets 25 units per acre. Any abutting mixed residential could supplement to get to the minimum unit capacity at a lesser density across the district. So now maybe rather than 1 to 8 units on a majority, we could say 1 to 3, 1 to 4, however that number is going to play out. We'll toggle that a bit to find that balance, but the law is a bit unique and it's set up if the areas are congruent and adjacent, so we can play with the density a bit more. And that's the tougher one to model, just in terms of the actual allowances and getting the numbers right in the density, but that's a more primary concept I'd like to model just to get it out there and see what the thoughts are on it. And if I can combine that with business A together, then I'll try to. But those are where the thoughts are at. The elephant in the room that's not in the room yet is I am out on vacation next week and the week after, and then it's Memorial Day weekend. So I'm trying to get everything nice and tidy for the consultants to model, and now I can come back and immediately kind of get to work for what would be maybe the June 12th engagement. And coincidentally also starting to prep the townwide mailing and save the date this week, so hopefully it can go out.
It's a lot of work.
Yes.
Given that a number of communities have passed the law and a number have decided that either they voted down or they're not going to do it, is the state considering any modifications or extensions or anything like that?
I believe any amendments or proposals to it have been shot down, but I can double check. There were some proposed extensions or amendments, but I don't think they got.
You don't want to go down this path to a certain point and then we go, oh, well, we're changing this.
Right. From my hearing and understanding is there's no changes coming.
I recommend, because I had a meeting with Brad Jones, who is the state representative for Reading, North Reading, to talk about this. And he indicated that there's been a lot of pushback from communities and that they were talking about ways and things that they might try to do to either make it easier for towns to comply or to change those requirements. And I even asked him if, can I volunteer to help out with that? And he said, we're not there yet. But he did indicate that there were some lawmakers talking about that. So I was just going to suggest, reach out to Bradley Jones, because he is the Reading state rep, and he is aware of this. I even invited him to come to some of our public hearings in the past, and he never came, but I did get him to come to my house, and I did talk to him about this. So he is aware of it, and he might be able to offer you even things that aren't official yet, but in the works, to just give you a little heads up on that.
Yeah.
Because there may be some concessions happening because things like what happened in Wakefield and other communities, and there's litigation happening and all kinds of other things. So, it might be worth it.
Yeah, I'll give him a call.
I think he's in town every week, isn't he?
He's usually around.
He's very present.
Yeah,
He's
he's
very
usually,
present.
I think he has an actual time that he's in.
Yeah, he has office hours.
Yeah. I am just operating right now under the assumption that we have work to do.
Yeah, this is smart, yes.
The other thing Heather brought up, affordable housing, is that statutory that it can't be more than 10%, or is that something we could?
So the requirement is that it can't be more than 10% and it can't be deeper than 80% area median income. You can look to try to get above the 10% if you model it, and that's part of our scope, but I'm just trying to work towards what's the final commercial concept, because that's really the only areas that affordability fits with the density. So it becomes, right, like if we use downtown as the primary area, actually we get to keep, because we're a pre-existing 40R, we get to keep our 20 to 25% affordability requirements. If we use business A, we have to try to model up to 15%, maybe 12.5%. it feels 15% is feasible from what I've heard and looked at on a preliminary basis, but it's hard to know. It kind of also depends, right? What do we set for controls? If we are saying 3 stories minimum density, you might end up back at the 10 to 12.5% rather than 15%, but that's not a bad thing to say. So it's all, again, just, it's one of those things you got to finish the concept before you get the true answer. But the model is programmed in, and we're looking to plug in whatever is necessary as soon as we decide. So
I have another concept to throw out there.
Sure.
We're having a quiet meeting.
Yeah.
And it comes from this place, that there are, from 2 places, that I hear a lot of people, I heard this at town meeting, we heard it in our hearings, of why would we do anything other than the bare minimum, which I find both understandable and personally a little frustrating because there is a housing crisis. Another thing I heard at town meeting, a town meeting member who was also a local architect made a very compelling case for MBTA communities, because she said she has clients who simply want to make, change their home to make a place for parents or a place for kids to have intergenerational living, and our zoning, except for certain circumstances, doesn't allow for that. Now, that would be 2-family, not multifamily, which is 3-family. And so it's been on my mind, maybe after we get through MBTA communities, is if we end up doing the minimum for MBTA communities, do we get closer to doing kind of the universally timely and good thing for intergenerational living by changing our zoning to allow people to do 2 families?
Yeah.
I just put that out there to consider.
I hear
anywhere.
you. So in terms of minimum compliance, and I keep trying to show, there's no perfect scenario where whatever zone we have is going to be 15 units per acre and 1,500 units. There's just no perfect answer in that vein. So any proposal is going to exceed in one capacity or another. The unit capacity is, of course, a tougher conversation. I certainly hear the comments. I think commercial districts, maybe getting them to model closer to unit capacity is a bit simpler than the mixed residential. The mixed residential, just as a concept of that, more dispersed, just inflates the unit capacity based on the acreage, so it gets a little wonky. But regardless, I think minimum, there's no perfect world where every minimum is hit. So it's just a conversation that I certainly understand, but it's difficult to achieve. So I'll just say that at its front. We should, even post MBTA communities, there's just a broader conversation on housing policy and what else is needed. Kind of as I've mentioned, MBTA communities can be one slice of the pizza for housing policy. And whether we look at ADUs by right, is there a radius where 2 units is allowed by right, maybe 3? Is there room that more broadly lowering minimum lot sizes so that not everything has to be 20,000 square feet or 15,000 square feet and it's single units but on 10,000 square feet, going back to that. So there are broader housing policy discussions that we, at least in the planning staff, would be intending to have and trying to prioritize post-MBTA communities. And of course, that gets back into the conversation of, well, if we're working on all of these things, you have to be cognizant how they all work together for the street parking, the schools, the things like that. So that's the only kind of larger looming question there, is what's next for housing policy, if anything. Well,
I just really felt for people who want to have something like an accessory dwelling unit, to have older people age in place. It could, anyhow, and I thought, geez, okay, that would actually get more toward affordable housing for many people, and we can't do it. So that's one of the many tools that you just suggested.
Yeah, there's between the 10% SHI, 40B, but like really we should be looking more about how can we incentivize 60% area median income affordability to get a little bit deeper into more the moderate income levels. And so it's just a broader discussion again where MBTA can't serve those conversations. So I ideally have been thinking of it more of like, we went through the HPP process and that admittedly lacked engagement probably from the town's end in terms of awareness and how this can inform a process like this. And so what I'm thinking, at least hopefully going forward after all of this, is through Cpdc, almost like the financial forum, and this is all still just in my head, but like kind of priority zoning forum on an annual basis, and how are we setting the priorities for this year and what it means. And there are back-hanging zoning things we can always look at, sign by law, things like that. But if we're going to prioritize certain elements like ADUs, we just need to have that discussion with the community and help them choose that with us and whatever that priority may be. So that's just a preliminary thought I've been thinking of. We used to have the zoning workshop, but it was more specific to a zoning proposal, but now just getting the engagement on choosing what that proposal is. Yeah. Anyways, I'm rambling.
So Andrew, two things. One, when you say mixed residential, you're talking about this multifamily housing required. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, if we do allow 15 units per acre, 20 units per acre, people don't have to build the 15 or the 20 units.
Correct.
So in this example, if they're zoned for 15 and they have a 10,000 square foot lot, maybe that would allow them 4 or 5 units. They could just build 2.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And in my view, it's like, well, why could you only do that? Why could you only build 2 in one part of town? But that's the bigger discussion. Like, why wouldn't anybody be able to build 2?
Well, that's the whole point of zoning.
Right, exactly.
You've got areas in town, for example, I would not want to be moving this, the MBTA communities over to any area that's a S20. Because now you're looking at 20,000 square foot lots.
Right.
Where you could easily put up 10,000.
Right, 12 units.
12 units.
Yeah.
Which is why we aimed at the downtown originally, because the lots were smaller. They were 10,000 or usually smaller.
Yep.
So you're not looking at a 10, 12 unit development. You're looking at 3, maybe 4.
Right.
And that was the goal there.
The side of that is you get no affordability out of it, right? If you develop all of these 2, 3, 4 unit multifamily residential, none of those have to be fall into the affordability. So yes, you're increasing the number of units, but you're not making any of those units more affordable to anybody.
Which is why all these scenarios are going to be really good.
Right, and that's again where you could still take the next step and say, okay, South Main Street maybe does have better affordability allowances and mixed use or multifamily, or downtown reopening that again. And so that's how you make up for your deed restricted affordable units. On top of that, and this is housing so nuanced, but it is a simple supply and demand issue. The more market rate units you have, the more stability you have in costs, and maybe even bringing cost of rents downwards. So market rate has a strong role in the housing market, both in terms of wait list, process to get into the units, nuance of if you make $100 over the allowance, you can't get into the unit, but things like that. So
but I think a lot of the people that fear this, right, are the people that are not looking at the way Tony just presented it. Like, okay, I'm a homeowner, right, and I'd like to take my one family and make it where I have 2 family plus a in-law apartment, right? So that my daughter and their family can live here and maybe my aging grandmother can live. They're not looking at that. The people that are afraid of this are the ones that are thinking, oh, my next door neighbor who has a 15,000 square foot lot in a single family residence, they're elderly, they sold their house, they're going to move into a retirement community, and a developer just bought it, and he's going to build this 8-unit brick box that's horribly ugly, and now I have to live next to this ugly thing that I don't want because I picked a single-family residential area, and I wanted to live in a single or two-family residential area, and now I don't have that. Those are the people that are afraid of the MBTA communities, and I'll be honest with you, I'm one of them, because I live in a very historic neighborhood. I have a 12,500 square foot lot, so my house could be demoed and built as a 6-unit apartment building or 6-unit building. And none of the buildings around me are more than two-family, and that would really seriously change the character of the neighborhood that I live in. And I'm afraid of that, because, you know, if my house is worth $1 million and a developer comes in and says, I'll give you 1.5 mil because I'm going to build 6 units and I'm going to get $850,000 for each one of those, right? So I'm going to make a windfall on this thing, and everybody around my house is going to be disappointed because this potentially big, boxy, ugly-looking 12 or 6-unit building.
And I agree 100% with you. However, understand that it could be happening today. If a developer decided to do a 40B, which is 1 out of every 4 units, make it affordable, he can buy a 12,000 square foot lot, put up 8 units, make 2 of them affordable. And by the way, he doesn't have to limit himself to height, lot coverage, setbacks.
But he does have to go through zoning board of appeals to do that, because I'm...
And they can't stop him. If he meets all the requirements, if he basically has 25%, there's nothing they can do to stop him.
So our challenge, right, in Reading, right, you saw all those zones, right? Every single one of those zones, there's a neighbor just like you, right? Where, I mean, right, I don't know if you came, we had a couple meetings where it was, now I even forget.
Oh, the South Street project,
what's the name of that street?
Pineville?
Pineville, yeah, right, Pineville neighborhood, right? Right, same thing. We came here, we bought here expecting it was a single-family neighborhood, and voila, we have, you know, a big apartment building of sorts. That's unfortunately, right, Reading, I think Reading, our forefathers in Reading, made some really poor choices in terms of zoning, of limiting the commercial district, right? And it's so small, right? It's not even one zone wide, one property wide. And so what that means is everyone in Reading, right, is sort of, you know, is...
Every commercial property is impacting a residential.
Yeah. And so, and I'm not saying, right, like I completely understand that concern about what's going to happen to your neighbor. Our challenge here, sitting on this board, not that you care all that much, but right, the challenge here is that like there is no like aha where it's going to work across the board and no one's going to be impacted, you know. And
the history of this town is that there's been very prohibitive zoning throughout the history, but you also have to consider that many of the people who live here because of that.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
They wanted to live in this, right? And I'm just trying to
understand.
Yeah, totally.
Yes.
I'm just trying to voice what I think some of the big objections to this are going to be, right? And we saw that in Wakefield, right? There was a guy who stood up and said, this is just a windfall for developers, and he's kind of right. It doesn't mean that that's definitely going to happen, because the zoning doesn't mean that this stuff has to get built. It just means that it can be built.
Right.
And a lot of the fear is hypothetical, right? But
some of it's real. Some of it's absolutely real.
25 years, it could all be true.
Yes, it could be. Absolutely.
The other point about the history of the zoning is, you know, our forefathers didn't have a serious housing crunch. when they did all of that prohibitive zoning. They had plenty of land, and they just wanted to make this wonderful bedroom community with single-family residents, and they did, right? But we're in a different spot now.
And then someone built 128 in 93, right? And we sit in the perfect, right? In the perfect, and a commuter rail, right? Like, you can't have a
the most
better.
convenient town in the world.
Right, yeah, like, yeah.
So the other thing I was going to suggest is if the one thing that I think would help getting this through town meeting is if we can in some way get the town meeting members to go to these 4.
Well, that's what I was at town meeting stressing, like, you have to come now, right? There's
in here for those 4 sessions. By the time November happens, they'll be well-versed, well-informed, they will have understood the process, they will have known all of the iterations that you've gone through to get to the 1 or maybe 2 or whatever that you present at town meeting, and there will be a lot less debate over the issue at that time. Again, I don't know how you do that, but we've got to get the town meeting members in this room or whatever room for those discussions.
I mean, just for Claire, like, they were informed of the previous process as well, and they have been re-informed of this upcoming process.
And some precincts have had meetings.
Yes, for sure, yep.
You know, the town meeting members have had meetings, and most have not.
Yep. So.
You know, there is, we'd have to meet in a big room, but when those meeting announcements go out, so yes, town meeting members theoretically heard what you were saying and know that this is going to be happening, but there is a list that where town meeting members get emails from Laura Jem, and it would be worthwhile specifically emailing all of town meeting every single time one of these happens. That's what it was very successful, I think, with the vote that ended up authorizing the work that's happening now to design Killam. There were tours, there were open houses. It was like, you really had to not care if you didn't, get to know what was happening with Killam.
I mean, I would even treat the last one of your public hearings as the dry run for your town meeting.
Right.
You have the one issue and you present it to everybody, just like you're going to present to town meeting, and you just field the questions and say, this is it, right? And that's your dry run for November.
If we can get there quickly, if we can get there.
I think one of the other things that we need to bring into this, and I read the housing production plan, which has a lot of good strategies in it, a lot of good ideas, is there's a whole bunch of other things we need to be doing, looking at veterans, housing. I mean, affordable housing in this town is ridiculous when you look at the numbers. It's just, I couldn't live in this town.
You mean price-wise?
Price-wise,
Yeah.
Right.
And what are some of the other strategies we can implement, and how do we make the MBTA Communities Act part of those strategies? And they talk about that in the plan. But there are other strategies the town needs to develop to make the town more livable and more affordable for seniors and people who live here for a long time that can't afford to live here anymore. Or want to sell their house for $1.5 million because someone
Our
wants to buy it.
situation is we raised 3 kids here, but they're all moved out. Right? We're in a 5-bedroom house. We don't need to be in a 5-bedroom house. I would love to sell that to one of my kids, but they could never afford it. And I need much of the revenue that house has earned over the last 25 years that I've sunk into it. I need that for my retirement, right? That's my nest egg. So, I don't know. I don't know how you answer that question, because that's why, for me, the affordability issue is so much more important than meeting the number of units and where it goes and who gets impacted. Because if you can't make the whole idea behind this law was to address the housing crunch, but the secondary purpose of it was to make things more affordable in Eastern Mass for
Right, and that's where, housing variety plays a role in having different options and different scales of unit sizes, units in terms of 3 or 4, but also 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, 1 bedrooms, things like that, and how your policy can promote all types of housing allowances in the right scale and sense for any existing context. And so I hear you for sure. And again, affordable units play a strong role and have a strong benefit, but the unfortunate nature of them is they require high density in less desirable areas like Main Street or down by Reading Woods and out of the way just because of their scale. And we've done good work downtown, which actually has good affordable units, so that is a strong role, but they are just one answer, and we tend to always look for that one answer here. And so how, if at all, can we evolve that thought in conjunction with it, so to partner with it. So that's all.
So one thing, if I read the reporting on the lawsuit in Rockport correctly, that one of the things that lawsuit brings up is the disproportionate, or the disproportionate zone that they created, right? They created it in the less affluent section of town. And so all the impacts go to that neighborhood, which is exactly opposite of what I know that this administration is trying to do across the board. And I know I brought this up in the beginning, but I do think, right, what would be horrible is if we went through this whole thing and then, right, and then like any town that didn't take that into account, their zoning got shut down and had to go redo it again, right? We don't want that. My statement to you is, like, as we go through these different alternatives, we should be looking at how those compare to the right, because we have a couple of EJ census tracts in town, and like, are some of these alternatives, disproportionately impacting them to the other, and that has to be part of the way that we think about this, because that's likely to be an issue. I would be surprised if there's not some traction in that lawsuit. Not that it makes the whole thing go away, but that there's some nuance there, as you say, changes might stem from that.
And it's interesting, because in Reading, I think we have just 2, our EJ census tracts are within a half mile of the train station.
Yes.
Well, I was thinking about this is, the interesting thing is across eastern Massachusetts, think of the towns, right? Like, and think of the neighborhoods in those towns that are, that are less wealthy, right? It's usually the neighborhood within quarter mile of the train, so there likely is something there.
Oh yeah. And I worry that, well, we aren't going to be able to do anything about this, but I worry that a path that we take is going to end up creating more EJ census tracts if we don't do it well. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, for sure. All of that is in long-term thought of, the scales, allowances, costs. I have a lot of things that I have to figure out long-term wise, but all good food for thought. I have 3 days to buy some notes on some things. So
I hope you're going someplace good.
I am. So thank you all.
Think of those 4 better.
I'll be on a much better train system. But yes, thank you all. A good conversation tonight, and thank you.
Have you, I read or heard that in either Winchester or Burlington, they did produce a zone that was largely an overlay of existing developments, multifamily developments. Is that something, do you know if they were successful at that? Is that something is there a way that we can do something along those lines for some of the buildings that are already built around the train station, like,
Yeah.
Post office square, whatever, just to be able to utilize those as part of the zone, particularly because they're within the half mile. And maybe that helps in some of your density calculations or your unit number calculations.
Yeah, it's a little difficult in Reading. I think Wilmington was looking at it and they put a pause. What I know we can't do is like use the gazebo circle, Reading Woods. Those areas down there likely wouldn't pass merit, but if we were to say look at downtown and zoning there, the harder part is, right, I mean, it's getting back to, right, if we write in 50 units per acre as a by right, that's close to what those developments were at, but you don't necessarily get credit for them. But what we'd be saying is, we've allowed this already, can we continue building down this type of path in downtown? So you don't necessarily get credit, but you can use the zoning to match what try to match what exists today.
But I also, right, this is part of the thinking there is that you're rezoning a parcel that was already just developed, so so it's not likely that particular parcel is going to redevelop because it was just invested in it. And so there's a couple of those that had already just been invested in. Right. That's
the mixed the concept that was discussed strongly did try to do that to the best degree, right? Trying to get some elements of scale with like the existing multifamily there, the schoolhouse commons, the things we showed along the way. So it's a bit more nuanced, but certainly, right, we can, in certain areas, you can craft the zoning to what exists and try to mimic it. And that's really our intent no matter where we look, so. Thank you, guys. I mean, stick around if you would like to.
Yeah, we really appreciate all the work you guys are doing.
Thank you.
It's a lot.
No, it's a helpful conversation. Thank you.
Thanks.
What was left was recalc.
Planning updates.
Planning updates. So I'll start at recalc. This is a project I have not substantially delved into a lot of detail on, but what is going on is the recalc committee, and I think to a degree the Simmons Way Exploratory Committee for their specific charge maybe helped to finalize some thoughts there. But recalc is a volunteer committee that's been looking to establish the need for a new senior and or community center, and they've been working through an engagement process and understanding process, and really where they've finalized is that from the beginning to now, the 3 preferred sites, putting them on paper on what they could look like development-wise and need-wise. Those 3 sites are the Pleasant Street Center in its existing location, but could that be remodeled? It was Simmons Way and town-owned property down by the ice arena, and it was Oakland Road adjacent to the school. Each of them has as we know well on this board, unique circumstances and troubles, I guess, for each site. So, right, whether it's wetlands, ledge, development, things like that. Pleasant Street Center site is small. What they've asked now that these sites are put on paper is if we, through the planning process, can start providing any comments at the high level land use need or thoughts, right? Like what site might be fitting when we look at a broader level, right, of housing and community center. What's the best way connections wise? What site serves that? If Pleasant Street Center is chosen, they're thinking of a parking garage. Is that something that we endorse or maybe could think of a little differently? It's all high level questions right now, but if there are any preliminary thoughts scrolling through these in terms of community center and site locations that you have, I'm happy to garner them, but.
So, I'll start, right? Because I think we talked about this in some meetings related to something before, right? It's I think the Oakland Road area, right? I mean, that is already a community, community area. And so, right, I think that sort of fits in with that use. And that was a criticism of the previous proposal on here, which turned that into, which there is, right, the affordable housing or the housing development on here. And I think that, if we are ever to develop this, having a facility like that seems like it would be a good fit. I think there's a lot of challenges. I think the ledge issue was sort of undersold in the way that it was presented in here, right? Because we were just dealing with the neighborhood down the hill and all their water issues, and it all runs downhill. So, and then blasting that hill for a pickleball court seems aggressive. Right. I certainly get, we talk about downtown all the time. I do have a hard time seeing fitting everything that they want with a senior focus. Downtown. It would be great if there were a site that was a little bit bigger and there you could have parking, it was more accessible in the accessibility way. It's great for able-bodied people to have a site there. Like that would be great. But I have a hard time seeing that working well.
Yeah, agreed.
So, and then, over by the hockey rink, I don't know, I sort of feel it'd be nice to have a location where everyone doesn't need to drive to everything, right? And that one, to me, the one over, by the hockey rink, there's everyone has there's not a chance to walk there, but hardly anyone. At least Oakland Road, it would be to me a little bit more of community centered.
The issue I have with Oakland Road is, and I don't go there. You guys probably do because you have kids in high school.
I've walked all through there.
But I just know when I'm driving down Willow Street, when Austin Prep is either starting or ending, traffic's a nightmare. And I can't imagine what it's like when Reading High has stuff going in and out. The traffic just must be brutal. So I'm wondering how that can be mitigated. And also, it is a challenging site.
It's a very challenging site.
Yeah. The nice thing about the Simmons Way is it's kind of a cleaner site. You do have some wetland issues and things like that, but you got a lot more you can deal with. But like you said, it's going to get there.
It's like building an auto-oriented facility. I don't think that's really what we as a community we should be striving toward.
It's nice that since I've been retired and I have some obligations that I have to go to the post office and the bank on a regular basis, I spend a lot more time walking around downtown, and I'll run errands to 4 or 5 different places, stop and see, and do stuff, and go down to the bank and go to the post office and get a cup of coffee. So that's kind of the nice thing with the Pleasant Street, is that it is central to a lot of things that you're going to be doing, and you can stop in and see your buddies or have a cup of coffee or play some cards, or go to an event there. Whereas I probably wouldn't do that at the other two sites.
Pleasant Street, I love the location, I think everybody would, but in terms of if you kept that building and tried to improve it accessibility-wise and energy-wise and those kind of loftier goals, is is difficult, and let alone then if you were adding new structure or parking garage or anything to expand the facility, how that all plays in. So that's
one of the things with active living too is, which is, nice about the Simmons Way, is you can put a walking path in.
right.
Yeah.
You have a lot more opportunities for outdoor stuff as you don't really have that at Pleasant Street.
Yeah, Simmons Way is an interesting one, just in partnership with the ongoing Killam discussion and what evolutions there are to try to prioritize sidewalks or walkability in those areas a bit more to promote walking to school and maybe even then walking to the community center if at all, but Haverhill Street's tough. It's narrow and fast.
Yeah, there are bike lanes on Haverhill right now, but.
Bike lanes, yeah.
So we're done, on the Simon's Way Exploratory Committee as well. And so these conversations kind of overlapped. One thing about the Simon's Way property is that what SWEC recommended, basically a progression of things. So it was like, you could do a little. What we heard was that there is a demand, surprise, surprise, demand for more practice fields. You could do pickleball, you could do practice fields. Then you could build it out a bit more by renegotiating the lease with Burbank and do a community center, which could be entirely compatible with an active living center. One of the things that we considered and wrote in our final recommendations, which haven't yet been presented to the select board, apparently they might be tomorrow night, is that some things like recreational fields, there's not another location in town right now that's under consideration. I know this, so I'm just going to share it, but lacrosse kids, middle schoolers were practicing start time at 9 o'clock at night on school nights this spring because there's just not enough. Oakland Road, it's such a challenging site because of the ledge. I really have, when the affordable housing proposal was going on, I walked all through there because I was trying to envision it. Mm-hmm. It's not a huge site, and it is challenging. One of the things I love about that whole high school and field area is that there is such a community feel. And I thought for a long time, that would be a great place for a community center just to add to it. The traffic, actually, I don't think the traffic is as bad as it is on Willow at the Austin Prep drop off and pickup times, but it's only twice a day. Mm-hmm. And you could easily do programming to avoid that. A challenge, I do think there would be a challenge of having pickleball right there by those houses, but I also don't know that pickleball has to be only where the community center is. I think there's no reason you can't put pickleball down there by Simon's Way. Mm-hmm. I think there's a real opportunity and probably a need to take a look at both of those recommendations and see how they can be mixed and matched.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm just going to put this out there if you want to give it. I am confused about what this facility is. I've heard it called a not senior center. I've heard it called a 60-plus center. I've heard it called an intergenerational center. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's because the jury's out, but I think that pretty soon clarity needs to be given around whether this is a community center or a 60-plus.
I agree. I think, right, at least for us too specifically, right, like we're not necessarily the ones that are like deciding their needs and which site best accommodates their needs. Right. So there just needs to be a bit more, hopefully.
And if it's intergenerational, that it can inform a bit more about where it makes sense to have it. A more walkable location, perhaps. Yeah. We were
in the town of Air. We were looking at the same process, and the concept of having a multi-generational or an active living center was that you could program things with youth and seniors, and then you could program where they're doing things together. Mm-hmm.
And I love that idea.
And that is
but I don't know whether that concept works that well here because you've got a lot of programming going on for the elementary school, middle school, and high school all in the same area. So I don't know how many of those kids would walk across the street and say, well, we're going to go play cribbage with the seniors. Or let's have a coffee house concert or something like that. I don't know how much of that you would get in a place that's next to the high school.
Yeah.
But then again, you may not get that at the other locations either.
Well, you get more of it at the high school than you would out in Simmons Way.
Yeah, because you just roll over.
And
Yeah,
going back to the Pleasant Street Center, that's where it's just so too bad that it's a two-story building and not configured well for
Yeah.
accessibility. Because I actually think that a community or intergenerational center right downtown where we also have a lot of active things going on and kids are down there all the time, sometimes doing awesome things, sometimes doing things that land them on Facebook pages. I think the location is great for a community center.
Well, that would be one of the questions I would have. I assume it's owned by the town, Pleasant Street.
Yeah. Yep.
The question is, what's their secondary use for it?
Right, what then?
Yeah, I mean, that becomes, right,
Yeah.
the option. Do you hold it, sell it?
And I did
broader.
note one picture in here showed some of the pickleball courts inside the basketball gym. I don't know which one it was, but it could be all of them except for...
Yeah, I mean, all of these are concept in nature right now.
Pickleball is a tough thing, as the pickleball advocates know. Nobody wants it in their backyard.
I think pickleball next to a shooting range is like incredibly compatible use.
Right, and as they show it here on the backside of an ice arena, right? Between an ice arena
Slap
and
shot shooting.
Slam dunk.
and a shooting range. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Simmons Way gives you the most opportunity in terms of scale, but that drives cost, right? And, when you touch soil,
Yeah.
Yeah, that could drive it environmentally.
yeah.
And the soils there, there hasn't been a full environmental assessment of the soils there
Right.
at Simon's Way.
Right, right. Yeah, you don't want to do a full analysis, because if you do find something, you're on the clock to fix it.
Exactly.
Yeah. But that just means that any of these
They could all
cost
run into
estimates
that.
have to have a large contingency.
Yes. And any one of these could run into
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what it was. People who've been here longer than I probably do, but it was the previous use of the site was kind of like a red flag of, oh, there might be something there, but the analysis hasn't been done.
I know Camp Curtis Guild had to do a lot of remediation for
Oh, yeah, here it is. There's a slide on
from the firing
environment.
range out there. And I
Yeah.
don't know if any of that is,
Yeah.
because I think they said there was high lead in the soils as well as some other potential things.
There could be arsenic.
lead and arsenic are typically the two we keep finding.
Yeah.
What do they want us to do? Give a preference?
No, I think just preliminary comments like we've just given, just in terms of kind of more specifics on the sites and process, but
Is that clear enough to pass on?
I think so.
And that's specifically why it was something to pass on, and I can tell folks on there also that you may comment about what exactly is this facility?
Yeah.
Is something to just kind of throw into the mix.
Yeah, I think, getting the path a bit more I don't want to say prioritized, but identifying more kind of the summaries of what they've heard to date is certainly the next step in how that informs their selections, so, which is just a part of that. So.
But my sense is that the pickleball courts are there. They're primarily not going to be used by the seniors.
Yeah, I don't want to get too much into the pickleball holdups. It could be pickleball. Maybe if they choose a site, does it evolve to something else, more structure, parking, things like that. But
I was doing some training over at the Woburn Senior Center, and they have pickleball courts there, and they were used all morning long. And even when it was cold out, the seniors out there playing. It was a a big draw.
Yeah. I mean, I am interested from the Pleasant Street side if they were to choose that as a preferred site, what is the need for parking and how can we try to alleviate that, if at all, in terms of a structured parking garage? That feels like a significant cost that could be maybe more programmable space or usable space, if not just surface parking.
Well, I guess the other question is, is there, instead of building a parking garage on site, is there another way to someone used the phrase "pet the cat" instead of "skin the cat"? No, pet the cat.
That sounds nicer.
To provide structured parking in that area that maybe isn't just dedicated to the senior center, but is a community asset that is in close proximity to the senior center or whatever it's called, right? Active Living Center, and that way it gives more space for on-site use instead of taking up the site.
Right.
So maybe there's a dual, a dual development here where, you keep it downtown, but to do that, you also create, some parking. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at a parking, a surface lot right there. I mean, I know that belongs to the...
I know where there's a surface lot there,
it belongs to someone else, but, there's always deals to be made, right? So...
Well, you could also buy out the residential lots that are next to it for $6 million, which was the cost to do the parking lot, parking garage. Buy a lot of property.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the intent of these comments is that we don't have to be tied to structured parking on site if there are other avenues. And I'm happy to take that back. Yeah.
But I do think, I think that for a space downtown to work, there needs to be some parking.
Somewhere.
Parking somewhere. Right? This isn't a case of build it and they'll park up around the corner.
Right.
And walk down there.
You need to
That's
have
not.
handicapped parking.
Right.
That's not a real feasible option. There needs to be accommodation for it.
Where are they in the process? I know this was, I think, in March they did this presentation. What is the next step?
I believe the next steps is to start gathering all this feedback, summarizing it and using it to inform the actual site selection process, is my high-level understanding, but what that process officially looks like, I don't quite know. Again, I'm on the periphery of this planning process, so I can figure that out though. Report back.
I mean, my sense is that the downtown site only makes sense if they can get more parking. I mean, I don't think it's a site that, I've been in that, I don't think it's conducive for people that go there and use it.
Yeah.
To me, it's just not feasible. I don't think they want it personally either. By that I mean staff and the like.
Yeah, it has its constraints.
Well, and one of the other issues with using that site is, what do you do while it's under construction?
Right.
Absolutely correct.
So for probably 2 to 3 years, you're not going to have a place to go.
The library moved over.
To General Way? Yeah.
Yeah.
Gold's Gym is vacant.
And there's a lot of vacant space over there. That could be
Why don't we build the
used.
senior center over there?
We don't own it.
No, you know,
That's a good.
All right. I think this was enough for me to report back on each and some general thoughts, but try to stay involved if you ever have the time and where this goes. I'll give you some updates along the way as well. Anything else we have?
Parking.
Oh, downtown parking. So after a handful of delays on the downtown paid parking program, I think we've gotten it to a spot where we can actually implement the kiosks downtown. Town meeting approved them a year ago now, over a year ago, last April. So just working through the back end on some things and getting them delivered and everything, but they should be ready to roll and installed, go live date June 3rd. So they'll be installed mid to late May. We're kind of re-engaging, just re-awareness building right now, but just as an update, as downtown is a key area, that paid parking is getting implemented for June. I'll be at the select board tomorrow just to give them an update as well, but letting the businesses know, trying to get the whole community brought up to speed. Everybody's been well aware. It's just been what's the actual date and when is this starting. So now that we have that pretty locked in, we can start rolling from there. So that's a long process and glad we're getting there. And then my hopeful next step is to establish a parking benefit district with it. That way all revenue and funds collected not only support the kiosk program costs, but could be used to revitalize downtown again. Parking benefit districts are a bit broad, but they can be used to support the parking, streetscape, things like that. Right now, it's fine to go back to free cash, certainly, but ideally if we can get the parking benefit district, that kind of ties the bow in terms of the incentive to help support this program. So that was just where that's at, so nobody's caught off by surprise.
Is that whole lot included, or are those bank slots?
It is only the Upper Haven lot, CVS lot, right. Some call it. There is private parking there that will remain private and unkiosked, so we have to do a good job on signage and layout and striping and making sure everybody's clear on what's municipal parking and what's not. And then Brandy Court, which is pretty self-explanatory down there, but there is parking under 30 Haven, but that's for the residents and businesses there. So it's only the 2 lots. On street remains as it is today, free 2-hour parking. The depot in its current fashion remains resident only till 9 a.m., 9 a.m., and then unregulated. So it's really for the lots to try to promote the turnover and the choice of stay, right? It was 2 hours, that wasn't working. It's been 4 hours, that hasn't necessarily been working. This is more for user choice and hopefully to drive turnover. It's not about the revenue. So that was a year-long park process downtown. Parking regulation process.
Start paying and I go, where's the kiosk?
Yep, yeah, so they hit a few snags along the way, but we're there now, which is good. So I have no other updates.
Anyone on anything?
Staffing?
Well, that's a good question.
That's a good question.
That's a good question. That wasn't my question.
If all goes well and to plan, we should have a second planner in June. I'm not going to get too far ahead of myself, though. There's a long time from now till then, but that's been accepted and should all go smoothly. They'll be in here early June. So
really?
That would be great. Yep.
Good. Okay. I do have another question.
Yeah.
And it's about the next stage of improvements to be done to the Birch Meadow complex area, like the tennis court, the parking. Mm-hmm. Is that going to come to CPDC? And the reason I specifically asked, and I realize this may be more the select board's purview, is I, as a town meeting member, have heard some concerns about the parking setup there. Where is that going for review?
So,
because it's on-street parking, so it's, I don't know if that's our purview.
It would fall to the select board, but the intent is certainly to give CPDC an update or some forum and heads up of when there's an avenue to provide comment. I think we're looking, and again, it's one I'm a bit on the periphery of and getting a bit more involved in, but finalizing the scope and contract with the consultant, and now we're just discussing, do we engage, right, there's been the engagement process to inform phase 2, right, previously during the Birch Meadow master plan process. So do we engage prior to design, or do we develop the design based on what we've heard to date and come with an actual schematic to comment on and provide some substance to comment on? So that's where the conversation's currently at. I think regardless, we want the consultant to be there to hear the feedback in whatever fashion. So that's what we're working towards.
I think there are some abutters who feel like they haven't been heard through the rec committee or through whatever, and are looking for the forum to have some comments.
Okay, that's good to know. I'll take that back to the team.
Thank you.
Yep.
And on a related note of something that was sort of hanging out there for a while, we talked about the water tower property that once the water tower was near to completion, we would start a public process to look at the property that was going to be a park.
Yeah.
And what park may mean. Right.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
So right. I think that project is just about there, and probably something that we should. We should initiate.
Yep, Ryan and I have talked about that. They're finalizing getting the carriers on board, but otherwise, I believe the temp tower is down, everything's set up. As soon as those carriers are done and in, should have even by then had the chance for any seeding and grass to grow for everybody to get a good look at in context of size, scale, needs, desires. So yes, agreed, over the summer we'll probably come with that.
Just thinking about that right before the neighborhood sort of thinks that like everyone's packing up and walking away.
Nope, it's on the list.
That something gets out there.
Yep.
Say no, this is still this is still on the agenda.
What concepts were they considering?
Well, so the area next to the water tower had been both wooded and fenced off.
There were a lot of trees and stuff.
And so part of the concern through that process was all that the wooded area was cut down. It wasn't woods, it was overgrown.
Right.
There were trees.
There were trees, lots of saplings.
Not like park trees.
Yeah, and that's where the cell tower went. And so the discussion was like, why is such a big area fenced off? What can we move the fence so that there's a space there that's publicly accessible, and then can we talk about what that means? How that space gets programmed, what it looks like. Is it active? Is it contemplative? Is it landscaped?
Right.
What are we talking about? So
I thought they could swing by and see what.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's not big, but it will be a nice space for that.
You do something like community gardens or bocce courts or something like that.
All the
above.
ideas,
Yes.
like a little, like a little path where you could sit. And I was thinking, there's a Japanese word for it, for like those really densely planted forests in a small area. That would be
Yeah.
All sorts of ideas.
Yeah, that's the tougher one where I get all these ideas again funneling down into something and how we do that.
Many years ago, the town manager talking about using the funds from the cell tower rentals to upgrade the neighborhood, put in sidewalks and curbing and park, things like that. I don't know whether that's still a concept.
I don't know either. I vaguely remember some discussion on fees and uses allowed.
I will say that when we had our public hearing on the water tower, that was never part of, that specifically using funds for that to fund any improvements. That was not part of that discussion.
When Peter Heckenblecker was the town manager, that was one of his concepts when they were concerned about the cell towers and everything up there.
Right.
That, if you didn't follow it, right, that story that went many different directions, had many different turns and twists before we ended up with what we ended up with.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say.
So, yeah, starting with Peter.
Yep.
And there are some, security issues related to the water tower.
Yes, yeah, right, let alone costs of whatever, if we figure that out, but, yeah.
Anything else we can quiz you on? You're never going to give us a light agenda.
You are in for a rough one. No, I mean, MVP 2.0 program is ongoing. We have some community advocates, but that's, again, social resilience building, so that's more of a planning process and strengthening engagement for the town. I think we've tried to evolve our engagement over the last year or two plus, but it's more about direct connections and partnerships that we're looking to understand and build. Net Zero Action Plan is ongoing. We just met with the community group today. There will be a quick survey on that. Not even a survey, I shouldn't call it a survey. It's a unique survey. Given how many surveys we do, this should be a bit different of a style for engagement in terms of that electronic feedback. So that's an important project. It's pretty high level right now, but we're starting to get into the specifics of strategy development and where the plan is going and what data can better inform it and where that data lies, if anywhere. Green Communities designation is gaining traction. The deadline is June, so we have figured that out to submit that application. We'll be writing, hopefully upon my return, some one-stop grants. The Walkersbrook Drive conceptual design process is nearing its end. Our hopeful intent is to write a grant to support the next phase to push the preferred concept or alternatives to a 25% design so that we could maybe start looking at the tip process with that. So we're working through that right now. We may submit a grant for a bike and ped plan update, looking at that again. The Haven Street project will need some summer engagement on, for sure, for streetscape and needs and where that's going process-wise. And I'm sure there's a litany of other things. I got a 3-page to-do list, but I won't.
Yeah, and we talked about the bike and ped plan.
Yep.
Help on that.
Yep. Let me just check my notes real quick, make sure I'm not missing anything. Oh, CPA process is starting to get underway. I need to get an update on that. But I'll be a bit involved in that, and eventually planning board, if any recommendation comes. I think planning board typically sits on a formal committee for CPA. I can't recall if planning is required or not.
We did it before. I was the Conservation Commission.
Yeah, conservation, historic, housing. Well, that project's ongoing. Sorry, go ahead.
I've, as some of you may know, right, maybe you don't, I was a proponent of pursuing CPA. Trying to get that rolling because it answers a lot of the questions that we always deal with and drive. I do also, right, there's a strategy to all of this, right? And the last time the CPA came up in the community was, do you know, it was 15 years ago, right? And so I guess I would question, right, as is there something driving it now? And is now the strategically right way to go? Because, if we follow history, you take a shot once every 20 years, right? So, I'll say, not a criticism of the existing town manager. I don't know him, and he's new, right? But I know that past town managers, right, there is part of a strategy, right? And with the changeover in town manager over the past, some of that strategy building has been lost. And I just wonder whether, with the other things that are on the agenda for the town, money-wise and everything, to me, it seems like an odd time to be driving the CPA.
Yeah, that's...
Knowing that, a no vote means you don't get another chance for 20 years.
Right, and that's where I partially see it too. There's been the drive for November because of the presidential election, and the CPA larger regional committee there recommends trying to get to that election time, but that doesn't necessarily need to be the driving factor, and it shouldn't be in terms of getting the process right. But figuring out those steps, I gotta get an update on it and where it's
and I say that as a proponent, right? I say that as a proponent, not as someone saying we shouldn't do it. But
I think one of the issues when we brought it before was the state match was going down and down and down to the point where I don't think they even had a state match.
Yes. Yeah.
So it was kind of like, well, what's in it for us?
Yeah.
And I learned a lot about the demographics of the town, and people saying, look, my water rates are going up, I'm on a fixed income, now you want to add more cost burden on me. So you start looking at it from that perspective, where there really wasn't at that point a real need for it, because we didn't see the state funding as matching. I think originally it was like 3-1 or something.
Early on it was,
and I don't know what it is now.
And the state match is back to being pretty good, isn't it?
I don't know.
It's around 20 to 30% if memory serves. It's not nothing. It's good numbers, but
But I think there's a lot of other things on the plate that, and one of the things I mentioned to Andrew at one point too was, especially talking about the master plan, we have all these other plans that we're doing. At some point, maybe we need to have a charrette or a workshop or something that says, these are all the different plans we have. These are the ones that are ongoing. These are the other programs where money's available. And how do we roll that all into a master plan without reinventing the wheel? So that might be something for once we
and that may be, right, is this where you're going? That may be the backup needed to lay out if CPA is path towards meeting a lot of the objectives that the town has. Right. Instead of
well, that project is on pace and on schedule. We're excited about that one. It is shaping up very nicely. The landscaping's been installed for the most part on the Lowell Street side, and we've been working through the east side, starting to shape it up now. So it's substantial. This is the Millette Stormwater Project off Willow Street. Been moving very well, so we're happy to say that it should finish on schedule. Again, not getting too far ahead of myself, but
what is that? What is the schedule?
Completion by end of June.
Really? That's great.
We're working through right now if that's feasible with landscape, and if we have to push that to fall or not, and what that means for site openings and things like that. So working through that, but it's going very well. Happy to report. Arts and Culture Master Plan is kicking into gear. There's a lot of public engagement going on right now for surveys and forums and things. This is just another one. So there's a survey going out trying to parse it down, but really to inform more broadly what our arts and culture center needs, or what those who work in arts and culture kind of need to support their work, what the community wants for arts and culture, right? Everything's a little siloed for arts and culture. There's no resource hub for arts and culture. The Cultural Council does their best. There's certainly school programs and partners here in town that do a lot of arts reading and things like that, but it seems to be lacking one central voice is what we're finding, so we're trying to figure that out a bit, and what that means going forward and how and where the town can support. I know last year we plugged in and helped program a lot of the downtown common events, but that was through grant funds and isn't fully sustainable. So again, it kind of gets back to that Main Streets or Business Improvement District discussion and intent. So it's all really just an informatory process right now, but that is ongoing, and there will be a survey out and some engagement on that. Biggie. We've just released an RFP through grant work for the Eastern Gateway and General Way. If you remember, in 2019, we did some conceptual work with Gamble Associates to re-envision what the Ash Street side could look like and what we deemed the Eastern Gateway. In terms of transportation connections and uses and just kind of very conceptual scales. This grant is intended to kind of take that again and inform it, but at a larger scale, both on the RMLD campus parcels and what that could look like, and also the One General Way site. So, I mean, it's an difficult timing just with the MBTA communities, right? Both are kind of overlapping, and there's a lot of questions of, is this being used for MBTA communities and should it be used? Right, we're modeling that area now, but that doesn't necessarily mean that has to be the only thing written into policy there. So it's a little awkward of timing, but we'd really love to start understanding, and it gets at a planning process again, right? What do we need on the town level? Is it housing? Is it trying to bring jobs in? Is it trying to do a Woburn Mall-esque, Linfield Marketplace-esque development? What's the real desire down here? So that will be undergoing. The RFP just opened, so it closes at the end of the month, and then we gotta get into the contracts and things like that. So it'll be some time, but it's a really unique and interesting opportunity, especially with, if you watched the RMLD Board of Commissioners last week, and I don't know why you would, but we were there, and they are supporting the grant as well, because RMLD is starting to look at their needs as an organization and campus consolidation, or what they need for office space and trucking and loading and these things. So it opens the door just to say, well, here's what your needs are, here's what we're envisioning, how do they tie together? Does Pond Meadow extension start to play a role? All these things. So it's a unique opportunity just in terms of visioning and how that then informs policy, zoning policy, other types of unique avenues to incentivize the development you wish. But keep your eye out for that one.
Andrew, does that also impact your Walker's Brook redesign?
It doesn't really. They can work sort of in partnership, but right, the zoning is all, or I guess the conceptual reviews are all on parcels, right? Certainly any connections, New Crossing Road and things like that, and how that ties into Walker's Brook, but it's almost good timing with the Walker's Brook corridor, conceptual designs, and now looking at this, it's again reimagining the whole area and how can we build to that and promote that. And Walker's Brook is to a good degree in our control and how we can design that to inform the vision and promote the vision, both in connection to Wakefield, but also connection to those parcels and even subsequently downtown, if at all. So it will be, that's more of the linchpin is how do you start tying it all to downtown and making it more pedestrian friendly, or alternate transit friendly, or just a better connection in general. So it's a bit early, but I don't think it necessarily changes anything in the Walkersbrook design work. Good question.
It's a lot.
There is a lot. There's a lot going on. I think that's it, though.
Ready to close?
Anyone?
Are you ready for a move to adjourn?
Was that a motion?
I think so.
All right.
Okay, so
All in favor? All right.
Great.
Okay.